Community Schemes Ombud has slammed the illegal emergence of community schemes, and this follows last week's fire in the Johannesburg CBD that claimed 77 lives. The Ombud says that it's particularly concerned by the rampant growth of hijacked buildings and that cartels who run them have no regard for legislation and living conditions. And what is more pressing is the loss of innocent lives. And joining me now to discuss this is the Executive of Corporate Affairs, Mr. Lesiba, Seshoke, who is the executive of the Community Schemes Ombud Service. Good evening to you, Lesiba, and thank you so much for joining us. Maybe just to give us a sense of what the Community Schemes Ombud Services are. What do you do exactly in terms of mediation with regards to land disputes?
Yeah, good evening, Cindy, and to the viewers at home. Well, the Community Scheme Ombud Service is a Section 3A entity of the Department of Human Settlement. We are actually a regulator. We regulate all community schemes such as share block schemes, your sectional titles, your block of flats, and all shared living arrangements in the country. In that we provide, we look at scheme documentation to actually ensure that it can meet the constitutional muster in the country. So that's actually the first. The second is that we provide a dispute resolution service for the entire community sector, community scheme sector, that is people living in all these estates in the country, such that if there has to be a fight or a conflict between the people living in the schemes and the leadership of the schemes, we are actually a first point of contact because we provide a quasi-judicial service to the sector.
And Lesiba, just looking at the hijacked buildings, and we see obviously the authorities all flocking down to the CBD, just looking into the disaster that happened last Thursday. What in your organization doing to make sure that, one, these kind of tragedies are prevented or avoided, and secondly, that people are then allocated adequate, humane accommodation as opposed to what we're currently seeing?
Well, let me hasten to say, Cindy, that what we've seen at the Johannesburg City Centre is quite horrific. Obviously, that does not necessarily fall under us because it's actually hijacked buildings. It's illegal community schemes, if I were to say. But we are saying that this provides a fundamental lesson to all of us, especially because we still have got a significant portion of community schemes in the country that are not registered as required by the law, which actually make them unlawful. So we are really firstly appealing to people who live in this kind of arrangements, the arrangements that are supposed to be lawful, which are not lawful because they are not registered with the CSOS as they are required to by the law, to say that it's time now that you come forward and register your scheme, because if you do not do that, you then really are going to get very exposed soon when this kind of things that happened at the city center happen to you. We are already seeing a huge amount of conflict in community schemes, people referring to us, and our first point of departure is to check whether that particular community scheme is actually registered with the CSOS as is required by the law. Secondly, we feel that all of us have got an important role to play to ensure that people do not live in this kind of arrangements that are actually at the city center. It will not help to say, as a person living in a community scheme, and say, it does not affect me. It's actually some kind of squatter camp in the city of Johannesburg. It does affect you, and we all have got a role to play. And as we have said in our held last month, that one of the things that we need to do as a sector is to try and bring the previously disadvantaged people on board by giving them the contracts such as your security service contracts, your gardening service, your audit service, so that these people are in some time are able to come on board.
Lesiba, but having the multidisciplinary approach and a collaborative effort is one thing, as opposed to what your organization as the Community Schemes Ombud ought to do. Do you not have inspectors that can basically do a door-to-door footwork to establish who the buildings may belong to, together with the other ministerial departments, the police, etc., and just get rid of it? Why is it that we are still waiting for the hijackers, the alleged hijackers of buildings, to come forward and have their illegal schemes registered? What would compel them to do that?
Well, Cindy, I think I've said this in the beginning, that it's important to distinguish between what happened at the city centre last week and the unlawful community schemes that we are dealing with. Obviously, our current legislation does not allow us to fully follow up, inspect, and do all those kind of things. But what we have done, because that is actually something that falls within the ambit of the police service, we are really now hard at work with the police service as well as the NPA to ensure that there is enforcement for schemes that are refusing to register with the CSOS as they are required by law.
Okay, we're going to leave it there indeed, Mr. Seshoke. Thank you so much for your time. That's Lesiba Seshoke from the Community Schemes Ombuds, talking about illegal community schemes, as we've seen in the CBD of Johannesburg and many other large cities around the country, where buildings are just essentially taken over by unscrupulous and rogue landlords who take money from the innocent, vulnerable and downtrodden that need cheap accommodation. But that's where we'll leave it.